Hey, it's another Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and so looking forward to sharing just a little bit of what I've been reflecting on as we've had lots of things change since last Wednesday with governor's orders and president's hopes and governor's orders again all changing and looking like it adjusts what churches can and can't do. We've been adjusting plans here as well. We've gone through cycles of, hey, maybe we'll open June 7th, to, hey, that doesn't look like it'll happen, we'll need watch parties, to who knows when it's going to open, to executive orders that say that legally we're allowed to have people in the building starting today, or this weekend would be the first Sunday that we could do that. And so we've been meeting together as a staff, meeting together as a board, trying to figure out what re-entry to physical gatherings look like for our church, how we honor a tension of safety and excitement to get together, and how those things kind of pair with each other. And I'll be sending out an email a little later today with all of the conclusions of what that is, but am looking forward to just giving you a glimpse of some of what that thinking process has looked like for me. As you can see today, I'm at the building. I'm standing in the sanctuary right now, where for the last 11 weeks or so, I've come every Sunday morning to preach to that camera. I've looked straight at that thing while delivering a sermon for 11 weeks or something like that, and it's strange and weird. You can see some chairs set up in the room behind me. Those haven't been there most of those weeks as we've been having those services. They've had a few chairs around for the worship team to sit in, but usually not more than 10 chairs in the whole room. It's kind of been a vacant open space, 2 or 3 tech people back there, and the worship team sitting in chairs. I think right now the room has 85 or 90 chairs in it, as we've been doing some different layouts, looking at social distancing and what it looks like to set up chairs 6 feet apart from each other for family groups and things like that. And so we're in the works of anticipating a bunch of those things as we get to that. Again, there'll be an email with all those details coming out in a little bit. My goal of this devotional is not to spend all of the time talking about what that will look like. It's been about thinking through how we fix and rebuild what needs to be fixed or rebuilt for that kind of season. I was reading somebody else's thoughts, and they had referenced Nehemiah, and having preached through Nehemiah within the last year or so, I was reminded of some of the things they were talking about last summer as I preached through it. Somebody referenced what Nehemiah did as one of his first steps when he was aiming for this kind of rebuild or re-entry or new phase or season of what it looked like for Jerusalem particularly. And it was before he had announced anything, before anything had actually started happening. There was a section of Nehemiah chapter 2 where Nehemiah decides the first thing he has to do is inspect how everything is. Just to take inventory of everything that needs to be fixed, of where the biggest gaps are, of what the hardest problems are to solve, and to create a plan for that. Nehemiah chapter 2, it says in verse 11 that he went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, he set out during the night with a few others. He hadn't told anyone what God had put on his heart to do for Jerusalem, and there was nobody with him no horses with him except the one he was riding on. And he went down and went all the way around the wall. And while he was going around the wall, he was taking inventory. Before Jerusalem's walls can be rebuilt, before there's restoration for all of God's people in a community together in Jerusalem, there's some things that needed to be done. And by and large, that's the season I felt like we've been in as a leadership here for the last couple of weeks. We've known that whenever re-entry would be allowed to happen, there would need to be plans in place. That was always a clear thing. It's changed consistently, almost daily for a season there, on what those plans needed to cover. And some of that has meant we need to take inventory. We need to take inventory of things like how much cleaning supplies do we have on hand, how much hand sanitizer do we have on hand, how's the airflow in our building, all of these kinds of things that they've said, hey, make sure you're addressing and putting plans in place for some of those. And so there's been these moments where as leadership, what it has felt like we're doing is just kind of like in the night, regardless of what's on our hearts, we're kind of walking through buildings and looking through cleaning closets and supplies and thinking through hopes and dreams that we have and saying, what are the gaps? And what are we going to do about that? And Nehemiah says that he does all of that. And then after he finishes doing that, he comes back to the officials in verse 17, and he says to them, you see the trouble we're in. There's some things that lie in ruins. The gates have been burned with fire. We need to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and then we'll no longer be in disgrace. More importantly, he said, and I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And so we've taken inventory, and it's played out outside of decisions about safety. It's been things like 10 weeks or so ago, the main screen you guys look at for words when we're downstairs started glitching, started just flickering all the time. Thankfully, that hasn't been much of an issue. You haven't been in the building, and so we have turned that screen off most of those weeks and not had to worry about it because we've been focusing on the technology that's going out to the stream. But as we're looking at things like having people re-enter, we're saying, that's a gap. That has to be fixed. And today we think we fixed it, so that's good. We're looking at those things and we're evaluating them, and there's things that we need to put forward. But most importantly, one of the things we need to recognize is the gracious hand of God that's on us. I'll state this clearly, probably in the email I send out to the church as well. I'm not an expert on pandemics. I'm not an expert on viruses. I'm not an expert on constitutional law. I'm not an expert on any of those things. I've been called by God to shepherd, to pastor, to equip, to teach, to preach. Those kinds of things are what I've been called to and studied. And that's what the gracious hand of God has enabled in me with gift, and yet I'm reliant on all sorts of other things. So we're going to make decisions, and we'll publicize those decisions, and we'll be clear on those decisions. And I'm aware that people will disagree with some of those decisions, and I'm okay with that. That's human nature and opinion. We're allowed to, and it's healthy to have lots of different agreement. The hope is that what we'll see in it, my hope is, even knowing the plan we put forward might not be perfect, is that what we all might recognize is that the gracious hand of God might be on it, and that we can assume the best and hope for God's blessing in the midst of something that might be imperfect as we walk into it. As he communicates that, the people that hear him respond. They reply, let us start rebuilding, and they begin this good work. And I'm anticipating and hoping for an excitement that people will have about what this steps towards re-entry looks like and what it may look like for us to come together and be able to worship physically together again, and yet to have an awareness that there might be some steps that are in place for that. And that as we hear that, we'll have this unity of what re-entry and rebuilding looks like and God's hand in it, more than we'll have the other thing that happens. By and large, the people, the Israelites, the officials in Jerusalem say, yeah, we're excited to start the work. And yet, if you remember our series through Nehemiah, there were always some other voices. They show up for the first time in the book just after Nehemiah has announced that plan. In verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What's this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? How could you decide that? Why would you put efforts there? Why is that the decision you've come to? Why would you think that's important or valuable or best? And I've just been relating to that particular understanding. That as Nehemiah is leading, as he's putting steps towards finding the gaps in place, that as he's aiming to rebuild and see re-entry happen, that there's always going to be some voices that say, that's awesome, we want to start that with you. And there might be some other voices who say, man, what are you doing? And there might be mocking, and there might be ridicule, and there might be frustration. And in the midst of it, Nehemiah's response, which I hope will be my spirit and response as well, I hope it'll be the spirit of our church and our response as well, is this. I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We as servants will start rebuilding. The God of heaven will give us success, and we his servants will start rebuilding. We might not have the perfect plan, and there might be opposition around it the whole time. There may be people who can point out ways that we can do it better, and we'll be open to that input. But by and large, the hopeful spirit is the one of the kind and gracious hand of God that's on us, and a hope and an understanding that the God of heaven can give us success, as we have to balance those tensions of things like safety and things like celebratory communal worship and gathering together. I'm excited to be able to share some of those plans. So if you're from our church, you'll get that email soon. If you're not from our church, it'll end up on our website and things like that if you'll want to find what those things look like as we as a community, a dispersed church, look to having some of us being able to gather in the building again, while others will still be dispersed by their own choosing or because of the needs of the church and things like that. But I'm hopeful that we'll recognize that it starts with the taking of an inventory. It starts with recognizing the things that need to be done, with the gaps that need to be filled, and then from that, moving forward with the kind and gracious hand of God on us, and understanding that He is what gives success, not a perfect plan, that God alone is what can give us success. I'm hopeful that whatever part of Now Then Alliance, whether active attender, digital attender, or distant watcher you are playing, that you would be in unity, that God wants to give us success in this as well. Grace and peace to you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.